Right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations unto the Akim and her pushing his gospel in truth and in sincerity to the best of their ability given to them by Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord, willing, fall upon your houses. This is Brother Quanah Watts from the Arizona Great Millstone Camp. Come back at you, Lord will, with the edifying lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And man, we are in some very evil times, man. Right? For those that have been, walking circumspectly, right, looking around as we are commanded, right, according to Ephesians, the 5th chapter, right around the 15th verse, right, we're commanded to what? Walk circumspectly. And when you break down that word, it means to look around, right? Pay attention, right? And as we continue to do that, right, we ultimately see that, again, that we are in some evil times, where we are in the time of Jacob's trouble, right? We see Trump in this administration basically disregarding, these different judges and these different orders, right? Condemning his actions. He don't care, right? We know that we are in the time of Jacob's trouble now, right? We've been speaking about it for years, and now it's here, right? And to ultimately make matters worse, right, since he's been in office, right, he's been attacking, right, these different government assistance programs, putting these everyday Americans, right, into very, very bad situations, right? And in this lesson, right, Lord will, Lord will, it's edifying, right? We're going to touch on that, but I do want to grab this precept right here in 2 Esdras 14 and verse 16. It says, "For yet greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall be done hereafter." So again, proving, right, as we also read in Matthew, the 24th chapter, right, all the different signs that we read about in that chapter, as well as all throughout the scriptures, right? 2 Esdras, the 9th chapter, right? 2 Esdras, the 6th chapter, 2 Esdras, the 5th chapter, right? How we see all those tokens, those signs, right, happening. It tells you in Matthew 24 and 8 that all these are what? The beginning of sorrows, right? Again, meaning the times that are coming are only going to continue to get worse, right? Until it ultimately matches up with the prophecy of Daniel's 12 and 1, right? A time like never before seen, right? We read about all these different accounts in the scriptures, right? The siege of Samaria, right? 70 AD, as well as many other different situations that we read about and we look at and learn about, right, within secular history. And this time that's coming has to eclipse all that, right? So it's only going to continue to get worse, right, to fulfill prophecy, right, which is what we're praying for, right? We're looking and praying for prophecy to come to pass. Verse 17 says, "For look how much the world shall be," it's like, "For look how much the world shall be weaker through age, so much the more shall evils increase upon them that dwell therein." So evils are going to increase, man. And this whole, again, coming at, the government aid or the government, assistance programs is only going to make things worse, As it says right here, this is on the Newsbreak app, which I got another article as well, right? But it says Trump cancels $94 million in food aid. Central Louisiana feels the pinch, right? And, I don't necessarily know if that's just for Louisiana, or if that's just across the board, but we'll read in, the other article that I do have, right? It's a hell of a lot more than, $94 million that, he is ultimately, cutting from food assistance, but we'll get into it, right? It says longtime director of the food bank of Central Louisiana told ProPublica the organization's warehouses are emptier than usual, right? Which again is leading towards what? The prophecy, right, of 2 Esdras 6 and 22, right? Where these storehouses are suddenly going to be found empty, right? That's prophecy right there. Let's go ahead and grab it real quick. 2nd Esdras chapter 6. Back it up a little bit. 2nd Esdras 6 and 22. It says right here, it says, and suddenly, the very top, it says, and suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown, the full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty, right? So this is, again, right, building towards that prophecy coming to pass, right? It says the organization's warehouses are emptier than usual, right? It says Vidalia, it says, on a sweltering morning, Shannon Cornwell and Freddie Green got in a long line to wait for food. The couple has struggled to pay for groceries amid soaring prices and health setbacks, which prices have been going up for everybody, man. Prices have been going up for everybody, not just the elderly, right? Everyone from the poor to the rich. Prices have been going up, right? Gas prices have been going up, really across the board for everybody. Prices have been going up since the average household across America, just with Trump's tariffs alone, is going to go up from roughly $2,100 to $2,400 yearly, annually. That, and you break that up in 12 months, we're talking about what, $200-$300, you know, or $150, $200 every, every month that they're going to have to pay for food, gas, and just different, household goods, right? And that's just with the tariffs. We're not even talking about just the average inflation that was already there before he started raising, and putting on tariffs on different nations, right? So now you got to throw that on top, We're talking about just his tariffs alone has increased $2,100 to $2,400 per household annually, right? It could be sitting at with the regular inflation, right? Added to that, it could be sitting at 35. $100 to $4,000, and I'm just throwing numbers out there, But hey, that's not far fetched, man. Prices have gone up all across the board, man. Right? It says she had back surgery. He had undergone cancer treatment. Right? It says they turned to a local food bank to supplement their diets, which more and more people are doing now. Right? More and more people are going to these food banks so that way they can save money. Which is putting more strain on these food banks, man, right? But it says right here, it says although they're grateful for the food, lately they've noticed changes in what they receive. For months in the spring and summer, their pickups did not include any meat, Cornwell said. Right? It says you have to learn to adapt to what you have. Green said, which is hard, Cornwell added, right? It says, and here's the meat, right? It says in the spring, the Trump administration abruptly cuts $500 million in deliveries from a program that sends U.S. produce meat, dairy, and eggs and produce to food banks and other organizations across the country, right? Cut $500 million from these deliveries, man, which means, again, this food is not going out to these different, food banks or grocery stores or whatnot. They're not receiving any of that food, any of those deliveries, right? It says about a quarter of the funding the program received in 2024. It says the items that were delivered through the Emergency Food Assistance Program were some of the healthiest, most expensive items that organizations distribute. It says the cancellation of these deliveries, right, when you ultimately purchase more expensive food, you don't get as much, right? So again, you purchasing the most expensive food, and well, guess what? You're not able to distribute as much as you would if you were to just buy, right, a regular priced item, right, of the same thing. It says the cancellation of these deliveries comes at a critical time for food banks, right? Food insecurity is higher than at any time since the aftermath of the Great Recession, which was back in 2008 to 2009, right? It says according to federal data, the many food banks are reporting higher need than they saw at the peak of the scamdemic, right? More and more people are needing these food banks, right? They're needing these, what do you call them? These places that distribute these food boxes, like these churches, right? And I did a lesson, I want to say 2 nights ago, of 15,000 churches, right, that are ultimately going to be closing by the end of the year, right? And it could be more, right? It could be a little bit less, but nonetheless, all these churches that are closing, right? And they act as a pivotal, staple, if you will, for the communities because they hand out food boxes. They help with, food insecurity people, and they're closing. So again, it's just makes matters worse. This is what's also happening, right? Trump is cutting $500 million, right, from these different, government, aid programs, right? It says, demand is only expected to increase, right? There you go. It's only going to increase, right? It says this summer, President Donald Trump signed into law the largest cut to stamps in the program's history, right? Food stamps, right? And I think it was like 4 or 5 million, if I'm not mistaken, to out of one state. I can't remember exactly what state. I know it was down south, like Georgia or something like that, right? $8 million or no, it was like $5 to $6 million in food stamps was ultimately cut down from the recipients in that state, which hurts them drastically, man. And we can look it up. I might have my numbers just a little off, but I know that was just one state, right? And we're reading about the state of Louisiana right now and how they're going to be affected, right? Affected, right? It says ProPublica obtained records from the Department of Agriculture of each planned delivery in 2025, detailing the millions of pounds of food down to the number of eggs that never reached hungry people because of the administration's cuts. It says the cancellation began in mid-May when over 100 orders of 2% milk bound for 31 states were halted. The records show 4,304 canceled deliveries between May and September across 50 states, Puerto Rico, and D.C., right? That's a lot, right? It says all told, the deliveries accounted for nearly 94 million pounds of food. The true loss is likely greater, food banks said, right? Because not all of the year's deliveries had been scheduled, right? So again, they have more deliveries that they were scheduling, but that means more and more shipments, right, or deliveries are going to be canceled, so that you're going to see their shelves get barer and barer, right? Which is that 2 Esdras 6 and 22, man, right? Where these storehouses, right, these places that have food, that have water, right, are suddenly going to be found empty, right? And that's going to go from these food banks to these big retailers, man, And what is that going to do? That's going to cause panic, right? That's going to cause, people to worry, And then, it continues on, and you can read that. But again, this is going to cause people to, because again, food prices are going up, wages are staying the same, and more people are getting fired from their jobs, right? Which is ultimately going to be what? The fulfillment of 2 Esdras, the 16th chapter. Or it's like the 15th chapter, right? Beginning at verse 5 or verse 15, 2 Esdras 15:15 says, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands, right? And we're going to see that, right? These people are going to be robbing these stores, right? These people are going to be, doing it at gunpoint, which we've seen, in what was that, World War Z, right? Just one that comes to mind, quick, fast, in a hurry, World War Z, right? When he went in there to try to get his son or his daughter that medicine for her asthma, what happened? You had dudes going in there, bringing in their guns, right? Stealing food, this and the third, and we're, and they had a little small gunfight, It says, for there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another, right? They'll be breaking into people's homes, right? Because again, they're going to see that these storehouses are becoming emptier and emptier, and there's nothing that they can do about it, right? They might have got laid off, so they're they're about to get their last paycheck, or they just got their last paycheck, right? And spent all their money. They might be good. They might, have been able to do a couple side jobs here and there, but it's not able to cover anything. So what are they going to do? They're going to put all their money to where they need it, right? Rent or this and the third, and say, you know what? I'm going to go get us food. They're going to grab their gun, walk outside, and do what they got to do, right? We're coming into that time where people are going to start making these decisions, man. You know, and start making moves, you know, like this, right? With all these different, again, and to add, you know, to make matters worse, right? Even more than they are, right? There's a shutdown, a government shutdown that just took place, right? And that's going to affect, you know, another government assistance program called WIC, right? It says right here, it says government shutdown threatens food aid program relied on by millions of families. And I'm just going to read the first little bit of it, right? It says Washington or AP, it says a food aid program that helps more than 6 million low-income mothers and young children will run out of federal money within 2 weeks unless the government shutdown ends, forcing states to use their own money to keep it afloat or risk it shutting down, experts say. Right, this is the $8 billion special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, also known as WIC, provides vouchers to buy infant formula, as well as fresh fruits and vegetables, low-fat milk, and other healthy staples that are often out of financial reach for low-income households. The shutdown, which began Wednesday, coincides with the beginning of a new fiscal year, meaning programs like WIC, which rely on annual infusions from the federal government, are nearly out of money. Currently, the program is being kept afloat by a $150 million contingency fund, but experts say it could run dry quickly, right? So it's on its last legs, if you will, man. You know, we understand that how the government works, right? The government will try to, you know, ultimately, you know, they'll come to an agreement, but see, you know, and you know, for that agreement, those different deals to, you know, be and you know, put in place and established and ran and whatnot, it takes a while even after the deal is made in order for those funds to get there, right? So it could run dry within the next, you know, few weeks, right? Next couple months, you know, and if this government shutdown doesn't ultimately, you know, ultimately subside, and this is going to heavily affect, right, that you know, that food aid, man, you know, which is going to cause more panics. You know, people's food stamps have already been cut. Now these different programs like this, right, that are meant for women, infant, and children, right, are getting cut as well, making matters way worse. Right, let's go back to this, right? Verse 16, 2 Ezra 15:16. For there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. So these people are going to be sitting there saying, fuck the police, man. Fuck the National Guard, right? Which Trump is ultimately putting in different, you know, moving them around and putting them in different places. The California National Guard being put up to, you know, sent up to Portland, right? When a judge ultimately canceled his, you know, federalization of, you know, the Portland National Guard. Right, so he's using these, you know, the military, right, ICE agents and so on and so forth, right, to do what he's got to do. And these people aren't going to give a shit, right? We just had a situation in Chicago. Now, whether that situation was, you know, ultimately cultivated by Esau Edom, you know, or not, right, or was just a genuine, you know, pushback by the citizens. There was, again, ICE agents that got boxed in, you know, by these citizens, man. Right, which means people are on edge, which means people are, you know, ready to, you know, fight back, you know. So we're going to see a lot of this attitude, right, coming from these everyday people, man, because they're already being put into such a bad situation, you know, by their own government, man. They're not taking this shit no more, man, you know. It says, a man shall desire to go into a city and shall not be able. And that's because there's going to be curfews that are set up, right? Crime is going to increase to where they're going to need to set up curfews. They're going to need to set up roadblocks and whatnot, right? As well as they're going to be, you know, utilizing these roadblocks to monitor people who are immigrants or citizens and whatnot, so they can, you know, do what they have to do, right? Which is all according to, you know, his agenda, right? And prophecy. Right, first and foremost, right? It says, because of their pride, the city shall be troubled, the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. So it's going to get that bad. Why? It's going to get that bad, man. It's going to get to the point where people are saying, no, fuck it. You know, we don't care. You know, we don't care if you set up roadblocks. We don't care if, you know, the police come out or the National Guard or anything like that. They're not going to give a shit, man. Right? People are going to do what they got to do to take care of their family and to eat. You know? And as we read in the second article, right, a lot of you women are going to be at the forefront of that, those troubles that are coming. You know, a lot of you women are going to be asked out, man. You know, as we read right here in Isaiah 32, and I'll start at verse 9. It says, "Rise up, you women that are at ease. Hear my voice, ye careless daughters. Give ear unto my speech," right? Listen, pay attention, right? Because the situation's about to get real bad. And a lot of you women think that you're straight, you're good, right? You got that, I don't need a man type mentality, really mainly the so-called black woman. You know, you got a lot of, really just, Israelite women in general, they got that mentality, but mainly, right, the so-called black woman, the end up, right, has got that mentality hard, man. And that's going to be the, to their shame and confusion, right, trusting in that, mentality. Right, which is ultimately given to you by the so-called white man, thinking that you don't need a man, which is, part of his agenda of, taking the man out the home so that the name of Israel be no more in remembrance, right? We read that in Psalms, the 83rd chapter. But, you trusting in that mentality is, you're going to be, asked out, and you're going to be put, it's going to lead to you being put to death, especially in these times that's coming, right? Because as we're reading, right, there's a time of trouble that's around the corner, And again, mainly you women are going to be the one on the receiving end of all that judgment, right? It says, many days and years shall you be troubled, you careless women, for the vintage shall fail and the gathering shall not come. Meaning there's not going to be any food, right? There's not going to be any water. There's not going to be any of these little treats and snacks and whatnot that you women like to have, and, comfort food, your little chocolate, this and the third. And all that shit's going to come to a screeching halt, as we're seeing it do right now, right? Them brakes have been put on these food aid assistance programs, man. They're pumping the brakes hard. It's like going downhill and you trying to, stop on a dime. These brakes are being hit hard. And you women are going to be on that. Again, majority of you women are going to be on the receiving end of all this judgment that's coming, Because when people ultimately see, just like we've seen with the toilet paper, the gas, right? When people ultimately inform that, it might run dry, people start acting all crazy, man. Right? So what do you think is going to happen? Right? When everyone catches wind of these different food banks and stores, right, their stock, dwindling. People are going to start panicking, and when there's not enough, they're going to start fighting over the last little bit. And then when there's nothing left, they're going to go into these homes and steal your food. As we read going back in 2nd Esdras 16, it's like at 15 and verse 18, it's like in verse 19, it says, "A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor." 2nd Esdras 6th chapter, it tells you that friends shall fight one another like enemies. People that have known each other for, they're dang near their whole lives, or they've been living on the same block for 10, 15 years, right? They know each other, family members and whatnot, right? All going to be fighting against each other, man. Right? It says, no pity upon them, and not going to have no mercy, no compassion. Right? It says, but shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. Right? They're going to come in there, they're going to steal your food. Right? They're going to steal your water, tear everything up, try to find any kind of gold, silver that you might have, anything that's of, high value, right? So they can pawn it or trade it or whatever, And if it's, one man or a group of men and they break in and it's a woman and her children that are left in there, hey, well, guess what? Scriptures talk about that too, right? In Isaiah the 13th chapter, in the 16th verse, right? It says, their children also shall be dashed to pieces. Right, these men are going to come in there, right, and it's going to be, because even then, when people not having any kind of food or anything like that, right, scriptures talk about cannibalism, right? They might just, and again, this is, speculation, right? We know in part, we prophesy in part. According to prophecy, cannibalism is going to take place, right? According to prophecy, everything that I've, been bringing out through the Spirit is going to take place. So they could just ultimately, knock your kids out, kill them or whatnot, right? So they can have them. And then what they're going to do with you women, right? So they might do the same thing, but hey, they might, get a piece of, they might get a piece of you first. As it says right here, their children shall be, it's like their children also shall be dashed to pieces before their eyes, and their houses shall be spoiled and their wives ravished. So Esau, or whoever, right? Because we know Jacob's going to be put in that time too. you know, as well as the other nations that are here in America and across the world, right? They're gonna break into your houses, right? They're gonna see you, right? They might kill your kid if you got a kid, right? They might take you and grape you, right? Minus the G, you know, and steal everything in your house. And they might, you know, either take you with, right, as a, you know, a perpetual, you know, sex slave to them, or, you know, they might off you, you know, just get rid of you and leave the body, or they might take you, right, so they can eat you. You know, if you ain't got no food, right? And you see that in, like, in movies called like The Road, right? Which is a very, you know, a very good movie to watch, right? When it comes to, you know, speaking about the, you know, the end times, man, and what the people call the apocalypse that's coming, right? It's a good movie to watch, man, called The Road, right? Just The Road. You know, that's what's coming, man. Right? We are in these times, man. Shit about to get real bad. That's why we started off with 2 Ezra 14 and verse 16, right? For greater evils than those which thou hast seen shall happen herein. You know, roughly paraphrasing, man. We're at this time, man. And again, you women are going to be on the receiving end of a lot of that judgment. And this is why the prophets, right, are putting out these, you know, these warnings, right? These videos, which are to warn you, right? Pursuing Ezekiel 3 and 17, right? Give them warning from me, right? Making these videos to warn you that this is coming, right? And that you need to ultimately get right with the Lord. Otherwise, you're going to be, you know, asked out, man. You know? Let me grab this. In Ecclesiastes 12 and 1, and we'll leave it at this, right? It said, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, right? While the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them, right? So remember the Lord, right? And again, speaking to you women, man, right? I'm not going to get on you women too hard, but, you know, hey, you women need to get right with the Lord, right? Because again, as we just read in these articles, right, you got the WIC program, right, which strictly deals with you women and children, right, is ultimately being cut, right? Food stamps, right, which there's a lot of women, right, that are on food stamps, man, right? A lot of these different videos and stuff like that are women, you know, complaining about their, you know, dealing with, you know, certain things. A lot of them say that their food stamps get cut, right? And a lot of those videos are the so-called black women. So, hey, again, a lot of you women, man, are going to go feel some shit, man, right? In the coming weeks, days, months, you know, especially if this government shutdown doesn't ultimately, you know, ease up, right? Things are only going to continue to get worse. So, hey, take heed to what's being said. Take heed to the message, right? Because shit about to hit the fan, man, you know? So remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days, right, the bad days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. So turn to Yahweh B'Shem El Shah, repent. Acts 3:19, repent ye therefore and be converted, you know? So that you can ultimately receive that mercy, right, that grace, you know, to be preserved from the times that are coming. You know, so with that, Lord wills, edifying, Lord will straight to the point. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, B'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, B'Hashem, Rechak, Kodash, that belongs to the other apostles, the other bishops, the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.